Marcelo Zorovich is a professor of School of Higher Education and Advertising and Marketing in Sao Paulo. That's usually called ESPM. He says controlling prices is vital to fixing the country's energy problems.
I think Brazil still faces some challenges, and one of them relates to the fact that the country needs to fix some prices and keep the prices and the costs in a certain way that the economy helps develop the ethanol sector. As you may know, recently we've seen price increases in the oil sector and all the raw material, and that's one of the reasons why I think ethanol has not been so successful as it could be. And another factor relates to the competitiveness in the international market. And on top of that, I would add the fact that there are some other priorities in that the government is focusing on, such as the pre-salt and some areas that the country needs to overcome. So I think it's a part of a context that the Brazil needs to work strongly to overcome these issues with ethanol.
Before I move on to the other energy sources, I want to stay with ethanol for just another moment here. You know, what Brazil is facing is not unique to Brazil. The rest of the world is dealing with higher food prices, in part because of the ethanol development. And we've heard complaints from different regions of the world. I'm just curious, in Brazil, is there a plan to try to offset that by any means? Or at this point, are they just going to have to give up? Maybe that's not the right word, but downplay the development of ethanol.
Right. I think it's still part of the priorities. And according to the government and according to the private sectors that are engaged in this segment, I think the priorities are still very important, and we may expect more investments in the years to come. However, the pace of these investments is still a challenge. We cannot make sure that they will happen in the speed that the industry and maybe other governments would expect. But indeed, it's part of the priorities.
I mean, this whole energy discussion is a very big deal for Brazil. I mean, it's a part of the protest. Consumers are bracing perhaps for even further hikes in energy costs as well. Is the government of Brazil, I mean, they've said a lot, they've done some things that a lot of us have talked about, including us. Is there more they can do? Can they explore wind? Can they explore solar? Are there things that we haven't even begun to discuss yet that perhaps they might be thinking of? What are your sources telling you?
I think they should prioritize the other sources. Of course, as you may know, Brazil, the hydropower energy represents a lot, and the country is suffering the short term. But you cannot just blame the short term. We should look back and see that in the long term, the long run, Brazil, I think, should have invested more in the infrastructure and in the energy sector as a whole. So I think we should explore other sources, including ethanol, as we discussed before. And I think the country is still heavily dependent on the oil sector. We export to China, we export to some other countries, we import from Africa, for example. And I think Brazil should invest not only in the country itself, but with more agreements and try to align with other countries in South America, for example. And that's part of the infrastructure context as well, in my opinion.